Hi, I am Mig-L and Growlithe is not one of my favorite Pokemon, but I'm working on an Arcanine video which is among my favorites, and I thought it would be a good idea to make a video of its pre-evolution as an appetizer, so let's begin! I started by making a little drawing as a guide for the proportions and all that. Then I made this little bean for the body. By the way, I'm using air dry clay or cold porcelain or porcelain clay. The name depends on where you buy it. So, I wanted this little bean to dry a bit before continuing with everything else. So I inserted a wire into it and left it drying for a day.
The next day,
Then I took the wire off and made a little ball for the head, taking into account the guide, of course. As this material shrinks a bit when it dries, I made these parts a little bit bigger than what was shown in the guide, but just a little bit. I made a couple of fat worms for the front legs and flattened them at one end in order to make the bottom part of the foot, and at the top I made a cut just like that, just to make it easier to attach them to the body. At the beginning I was thinking of making just a sitting Growlithe, but as you may have seen in the thumbnail, I ended up making two. One sitting and one attacking or something, I don't know. So for now I'm going to focus on the sitting one and then I'll show you the process for the other one. Okay, so for the back legs, I made a couple of balls, pinched them a little bit in the front part to get the knee out, and flattened them on the back to make them easier to attach to the body. And then I made the toes from this semi-triangular and flat piece. After everything had dried, it was time to cover the seams that were left, so I put a little bit of moistened clay on them and rubbed it in a way it started to blend everything. Then it was time to work on the head details, starting with the muzzle, and sadly the first one I made turned out to be too large. I even got to the point of sculpting the mouth and nose and realized that mistake when it was already hard, so I had to remove that piece and do it again. By the way, what you're looking at is the second attempt, which turned out fine. And once that was done, I started to work on that little piece of fur on top of his head. Once I glued that on top of his head, I realized that the tips looked kinda rough, so I had to put some water on them, and that was enough to make them look better. And after that I made his tail. At this point I noticed that the tail and the fur on top of his head were looking kinda plain, so I decided to put some extra tips on them. The process for this was relatively simple. I just made the tip, put it in the place I wanted it, and with a little bit of water and the help of this tool, I started to blend them into the figure. And I also realized that he was missing his ears, so that was the next thing I made. For the fur on his chest I flattened a bit of clay, and when I was happy with its general shape and size, I started to make these tips by cutting off those little triangles. The cut itself wasn't very clean, so with a little bit of water and the blade itself I smoothed those edges. In order to finish the details on this part, I made some additional tips, the same way that I made the other ones. I also added those claws that for some reason are just on the front legs, and before working on the paint I gave him his tiny little nose. I only needed black, brown, red, yellow and white paint. And the painting process was pretty straightforward. The beige parts got a nice coat of, well, beige, and his body got a coat of orange because, well, orange. And then I painted the black stripes, well, black. And finally, with a fine brush, I painted the nose and the eyes. And with that, Growlithe was pretty much finished. But before we end the video, I would like to show you the steps for the other Growlithe, the one with the other pose, but not all the steps because it would be too long for this video, so we are only going to do a quick review of the steps that differ from the pose that we just saw. The first major difference is the angle of the elbows, which I made more pronounced, and I also glued both legs a bit more spread out. The back legs were a lot more different than the ones from the first figure, and more similar to what can be seen in the guide, which made them a bit more complicated. It is important to mention that while I was sculpting them, I pressed them onto the body so that they began to adopt its shape. That tool you see there was quite helpful to sculpt some details, and once the legs were ready, I stuck them in place. I wanted the mouth to be open this time, so I made the top and bottom parts separately. Since the other figure was already finished at this point, I knew how big each part had to be. And the rest was, well, pretty much the same as the previous figure, except for the tongue, because, well, the mouth is open. And with that, he was ready for some color. And that's it! Do you like how they turned out? If so, leave a like, comment, subscribe, and all that YouTube stuff. As I said, I'm working on an Arcanine video, and I thought it was appropriate to make a short Growlithe video as a teaser for the next video. Yeah, that's about it. Bye!